Well, I am super excited right now to be introducing everybody to the July Infinite Wisdom guest, my friend Andy, who has who I met years ago through a mutual friend, and actually that mutual friend is no longer with us in physical form, but he was a big um, he was a very curious person, and he actually factored into what we're going to be talking about with Andy now. And that is Andy's incredible work. So welcome, welcome, Andy.
Yeah, hi Hope. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And for him, he's over in the UK, as you probably imagine, and so it's the evening over there. So we're pre-recording this so that he doesn't have to stay up till all hours during our usual live interview time. So let's take it right back, and it's Andrew Porter to be precise. Um, but it's okay to call you Andy, right?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's great, Hope.
So let's go back and hear about you, because I actually don't know how you got into the work that you do. So tell us what you do and tell us how you got started.
Yeah, perfect. So, kind of executive summary, I guess, really. So my name is Andy Porter. I consider myself to be a psychic surgeon, which basically means that I kind of channel a spirit guide called Chen, and he works through me whilst I'm in trance, so spiritual trance, and then he performs what he terms as psychic surgery on people's etheric field. So these are people that have physical problems, and they're also people that have other sorts of problems like schizophrenia, that kind of thing, really. So my kind of how I got here actually is obviously like most people, it's kind of not what I was expecting as part of my life. So I was what I considered to be a normal person in kind of inverted commas, with no spiritual um, understanding, no kind of religious connotation or leaning at all, just going through my life with, a wife at the time, two children, and that was kind of me. Went to work every day. So I worked in IT. So again, it was a very kind of black and white environment from my perspective as a kind of IT architect. And then went through a bit of a difficult divorce, as most people tend to, and that tends to be the time that you get kind of pushed onto your spiritual path. So my spiritual path kind of came up and bit me quite quickly, really. So I met my now wife Jane at that exact time. So our kind of meeting, I think, was the kind of catalyst to start this whole spiritual journey for me, really. So I started to hear things and see things, but I started to see entities with people that I couldn't understand at all. And things started to kind of attack me whilst I was in bed at night and sleeping. And I started to see spirit, really, lights coming off, lights going out, shadows in the room. So all of the kind of spiritual things that we see on TV that I kind of assumed was fictional kind of became real in my kind of sphere, I suppose. And of course, I had no idea how to deal with that. I didn't have the tools to understand it and to deal with it. And it was pretty frightening, really, most of the time. And then I moved into a new house. So I kind of got divorced, moved into a new house in Wiltshire, in Chippenham. And then everything went completely mad. So kind of the house felt like it was alive to me, really. So I kind of come home, get goosebumps, see things moving in the corner of my eye. The heating would be turned on and off on its own at night. Things would be climbing into bed with me continually at night, in the middle of the night when you're fast asleep, and kind of touching you in places you're not really expecting to get touched. So, I mean, it might sound good to some people, but when it's happening to you at 3 in the morning, it's kind of not great, really. And of course, the other problem with that whole being touched thing is you're being touched by negative entities that have a very negative vibration. So of course you feel this immense kind of revulsion and fear because the energy is so kind of different to our vibration stuff. So kind of realized that I was losing the plot and having quite a big problem. And Jane had a lady called Christina that worked in a hairdressing salon who was a psychic. And Jane said, well, I'll speak to Christina. She'll know what the problem is and she can basically sort you out, which she did. So she did a clearing on me. So I felt great. The house was fine for a few days, maybe a week or something. And I kind of assumed that I could just go back to my normal life. And then, of course, everything started to happen again. So I started to hear things, see things, feel things. And then the house felt like it was being possessed again, basically. Only this time it was worse. So there was the kind of the pinnacle for me really was one night I was in bed and I woke up at 3 in the morning or something, and I could just see the kind of back of the wall behind me and realized the bed was literally kind of 2 foot off the floor at the bottom, and screamed lots of obscenities around, put me down and such like. And the bed just basically smashed onto the floor, and I spent the rest of the night shaking and hiding underneath the duvet with like.
Oh my God.
And of course, there was things in the room that I could perceive, but I couldn't really see or speak to. So in the morning, when I eventually kind of the light came up, I obviously jumped out of bed, looked. I had a laminate floor at the time, and the bed was on casters. So I looked at the floor, and the bed was off the casters by about a foot each side. So I knew that I hadn't kind of just dreamt this. This was a physical, real thing that had happened. And kind of realised I needed some proper professional help because this was turning into, a massive problem. I wasn't sleeping. I was trying to go to work every day. I was having my 2 children at the time on weekends and things. And whilst I had them, I could hear all sorts of banging and crashing and screaming noises out on the hallway. So I tentatively left all the lights on in the house every night, basically, and would then walk around trying to see what was going on. And I'd walk into the children's room and they'd be lying there fast asleep, totally fine. And yet I'd be hearing all this kind of rigmarole of screaming and stuff. So it was kind of a fast, and that kind of all happened in like 6 months. So I went from nothing to that, living like that really for 6 months,
Goodness gracious.
which was interesting. I mean, good now because I look back and think, it set me up to do this work, obviously, which was good. But I did have some sort of dark nights of the soul as part of that journey, and did consider taking a different path at one point because I thought I can't live like this anymore. And no one seemed to have an answer. All the group of friends that I had just thought, I'd kind of lost it really because I'd been through a divorce, that kind of thing. And we didn't really know any spiritual people that could throw the light on things. And of course, 20 years ago, the internet wasn't like it is now, that you can just go to Google and find things. So there weren't that many websites around and there wasn't much help from an internet perspective. So you were kind of back to, do you go to the GP? In which case they find you a big white box that's very soft in the inside. Or do you kind of go and see like a religious person, a vicar or something, to get kind of help? Because everyone was saying to me, the house is obviously possessed, you need to get it exorcised, which I didn't really understand at the time. But it felt to me like it was more personal, like these things were actually after me rather than the house. And then, of course, a lot of my friends wanted to come and stay on weekends to experience this kind of like crazy house. And when they turned up, of course, nothing would happen all weekend until they left. And then as soon as the door closed, I'd get goosebumps. The temperature would go right down. So the house would be freezing cold on the inside, even on a hot day. And all this spiritual stuff would start again, really. So that was kind of my intro into spiritualism, which was
Okay. I just have to pause there because that is like your classic movie thriller, right?
yeah,
Mm.
but that's what it felt like. I felt like I was living in a
Terrifying.
film. Yeah, literally.
Terrifying. And without any, I mean, you didn't really even know about what an exorcism was at that time? I
I
mean,
had no idea
these
about
were
any.
foreign concepts to you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Okay, so you really were a complete babe in the woods.
I was completely green in all ways, really.
So, okay, I have many questions, but and I'm sure you must have thought you too were losing it. That
I did,
maybe you,
yeah. I mean,
right?
I was going to work. I worked for a mobile phone company in the UK, so I had quite a good job. And I was trying to go in, and do my normal job. But of course, I was, not sleeping all night. My eyes were baggy. I was tired. I looked like I'd been awake for weeks, really. And, mentally, I was obviously struggling to try and keep all these things together because, and the biggest problem, I think, for me, Hope, really, was I didn't know where the way out would be. So I thought, surely someone can come along and just fix the house. And then I can go back to kind of playing football, drinking beer, and doing the things that I was doing, really. But of course, that never happened.
So when you look back on it now, you said you're kind of grateful in a way, but do you feel, and maybe with also with your further understanding about what all these kinds of entities are, do you feel this was a rude awakening sent by your higher self to sort of snap out of it? Or were these really negative entities wanting to drive you crazy and pull you down? What do you think?
Yeah. So my kind of perception on that now, really looking kind of back and looking forward, is that was meeting Jane was obviously the start of my spiritual path because I was like 32 or something. So it's like a classic time to be turned on. So I think that was a turn on point. And then I think the entities obviously had me as a target because I guess they would realize if I continued along the path and grew spiritually along with Jane, then we would be working to clear and remove them. So effectively, it was a case of taking me out before I came online. That's kind of what it felt like. Because I had one night, Hope, that I'll never forget. I was fast asleep in bed and I literally woke up and I was, something had me by the throat. I literally couldn't breathe. I was suffocating. And I put my head up and I could see four massive indentations in the bed around me. So there was something huge was on top of the bed, literally strangling me. And I was just gasping for no air. So I was being strangled, but I couldn't actually see this thing. I could see the imprints, and obviously it had me physically. And in my mind, I just screamed for like Archangel Michael, I think at the time or something. And literally the moment I asked, this thing disappeared. And I was just shaking like a leaf and I had like a red mark physically around my neck. And then of course it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. So I rang Jane because she lived in Cornwall. I lived in Wiltshire. At 3 in the morning, I said, something's just tried to strangle me. And she went, oh, okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow. I was like, no, literally, I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. But of course, when you tell these tales to other people, if you haven't experienced it, you just don't get the concept about it really, and for how lonely a place it is to be being attacked by spiritual things that you can't see.
Extremely lonely, extremely lonely. And so I guess in a way, they knew what you had the potential to become.
Yeah, that's my take.
They knew, and so that's why they were really going after you in every way, pulling all the stops out.
Yeah, and it
Wow.
really was, to be fair. I mean, there was a particular day that things were so bad, and I was, mentally in not a fantastic place, as you can imagine. But I remember driving down to Lyme Regis, which was a couple of hours away, and I remember kind of you get into that state where you're just like, I don't care type of feeling inside yourself. And I remember going around a bend extremely fast, well past the speed limit speed, and I just took my hands off the wheel and just thought, and then I ended up on the other side of this bend and I didn't touch the wheel, but I had my eyes closed. So I didn't actually see the wheel turn, but I went round the bend and I kind of grabbed the wheel and I thought, okay, so I'm not supposed to be calling it a day just yet.
Yeah, I could just imagine this battle royale going on, unseen between who's going to get Andy.
Yeah, it kind of felt like that really. And that was kind of like a monumental change in my mindset because at the minute I went round the bend, obviously I realized I didn't touch the wheel. So it kind of dawned on me that intuitively I was supposed to obviously stay here. And then the next day I went to Glastonbury and went into a bookshop and I was looking, it was a spiritual bookshop and I had no idea what I was looking for at all. I didn't understand half the words, the whole esoteric stuff I didn't get at all. I was walking down a line of books and one came forward, actually came out to my hand, and it was a David Icke book called Children of the Matrix.
Yes. Was
Literally,
this the bookstore on Main Street in Glastonbury?
yeah. I think it's
I
called
know the one, I know the very one.
Yeah, I mean that book slid out into my hand, and I picked it up and looked at it. I'd never heard of David Icke. And there was a picture of like a reptilian, I think, on the front. And I just looked at this book, and I opened it, and I read the inside cover, and I thought, what is this all about, really? But obviously, it had come forward to me, so I went and paid for it. And I said to the guy, "Have you read this?" And he said, "Yeah, it's really interesting. It's all about kind of, the spiritual stuff and the battle between light and dark and entities and things." And I thought, okay, things I've never ever considered or heard of really. So I literally went home and kind of read that book in about sort of 20 hours or something, and then thought, okay, I see where we are. I think I feel like, this. I've got the understanding of what's happening to me. but I've got no clue how to navigate it really.
Wow. 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 What a story. And then how did you, so okay, so pick it up and go forward.
Yeah, so from there, so I started, Jen used to come up and see me. We were sort of in a relationship by then, so we were seeing each other every weekend. So she'd come up and I'd like drag her to Glastonbury for a day on Saturday, and I'd come back with a whole pile of books on things, LSD protection, psychic protection, that kind of thing. So I started to read and learn. And then I met this guy called Brian, who basically does exactly what I do now. He was a psychic surgeon. He was only probably about 10 miles away from me. So I used to basically go and see him like once a week and pay for a session. And he thought he'd be doing physical stuff on me. So I just used to sit in the room and we used to talk for an hour, and I'd pay him just to talk to him so that he could explain all of these things to me, basically. So he was explaining the whole spiritual stuff to me and about entities and protection and that whole thing. So effectively, over the course of probably 6 months, I was just draining him of of his knowledge and his time, basically. And I was learning to do things myself and starting to protect myself and that kind of thing. So at that point, then basically, I joined a kind of crystal healing course and joined a Reiki course. And of course, when I started to do crystal healing, I was in a classroom setting with other people, and every time I picked a crystal up, I started to hear it talk to me effectively, and I started to see people in my mind, like visions of people trying to get messages through. So as a medium would, and the lady around the course said, "I'm not skilled to deal with this because we don't really want you in the class." Because she wanted to talk about crystals and crystal healing and that kind of thing, and of course I'm talking about there's all these spirits that are coming through that are trying to provide messages and talk. And she didn't want to get involved in that. So she passed me to another person called Paul, basically, who was a medium. So I joined a psychic circle with him and started to kind of develop that aspect. And then as part of my Reiki training, as I finished the last sort of Reiki master course, the lady Anne that ran that basically said, there's a small Chinese guy here who's saying he's your spirit guide and his name's Chen. And I'm like, okay. And I thought she was bonkers at the time. I thought she's totally like deluded. And I just sort of went along with it and said, okay, what's he saying? And she said, well, he's saying that he'll be working with you for the rest of your life and you're going to be a psychic surgeon, which I had no idea what that meant at all. And I came home and said to Jane, oh, Anne said, that I've got this Chinese guy called Chen. And then I didn't really have anything to do with Chen for quite a long time until, as part of that psychic protection training and becoming psychic, he started to come into the meditations every week. So I would converse with him and we talk and, we do the normal meditation, grounding, protection, open a door. Chen would be stood there. He'd start talking to me. So we started to form this kind of relationship, which I quite liked. And then whilst I drove to work every week, because I'd every day we had like an hour's drive each way, I used to talk to him on the way back. And of course, I was still very skeptical of this whole thing. So I used to test him with things. So I used to ask him. So I'd come off the motorway before my junction, and I used to ask him to just tell me left and rights to get me home, basically. So I'd go driving miles away from where I lived and going left, right, left, right, left, and eventually would come back and obviously arrive at home. So it was kind of my kind of bizarre way of testing this voice that I was hearing and this face that I was seeing. And of course, he thought it was quite funny. So, and Jane used to be sat at home with tea ready, and of course, I'd walk in like 40 minutes late, and she'd say, "Where have you been?" I said, "Oh, well, Chen took me out around Malmesbury, and miles away from where we are." So,
I love it.
so it's so that was the kind of like the meet the spirit guide thing, really. And then obviously I joined a trance group with Paul and a few of his friends, basically. So we'd all allow our guides to come in. And that probably took about a year before I was confident enough to let Chen take over properly physically. And then he stood up in the room, started to speak to people, and, kind of that was when I realized that this whole kind of trance mediumship thing was actually real for me. And I could then basically channel this entity that called itself Chen. And of course, Jen used to sit and talk to him for hours at night when we used to practice. So
And
that was
Chen, say a little bit more about who Chen really is.
he's never really given much away. I mean, I know he's not what he perceives to be, clearly, because at the time, he said he was a kind of peasant rice farmer from the 1600s and was married with 2 children, died when he was 34 or something. So I'm kind of visualizing this kind of discarnate spirit, this small Chinese guy with a big long beard, But then, of course, when I started to do psychic surgery and he'd come in, he started to talk to entities with people and actually, ask them to leave. And they would basically leave. And then that person would jump off the bed and say, the voices have stopped or suicidal thoughts had stopped and that kind of thing. So I'd walk in the room and speak to Jane and say, oh, it was kind of amazing. And she said, well, rice farmers don't do that type of stuff. So we kind of got to grips with the fact quite early on that what he perceived to be wasn't probably the reality, but he wouldn't provide any other information. So, we kind of went along with the fact that we would talk to Chen and he would do the things that he did. And then, of course, we started to get more people come to see us because word started to go around that, I was doing psychic surgery and people had good results. So they recommend friends. So we just kind of got busier and busier. And then kind of eventually Chen said, right, you need a website. And again, this is when websites weren't really, very common, particularly. And obviously the cost of websites were quite expensive. So we kind of went down the path of, well, if we create a website and we do that, then you need to make sure that we get the kind of footfall of people to pay the bills, basically. And so everything just kind of moved in a positive way from there, I guess.
Well, I should say so. At what point did you leave your job?
So I was doing that basically probably for 15 years. I was doing it part-time, so weekends and evenings, and we started to get busier and busier. And of course, it got to the point that most weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, there were lots of people pulling up outside because we had a house with a kind of small shed in the garden, and the shed had been converted to a healing room. So I had a couch in there and some blokey type stuff, really, and burned some incense. And it kept everything away from the house from Jane's perspective. So she could continue to make tea and do things in the house, and I was in the shed at the bottom of the garden with people. And kind of that carried on for quite a long time. But we did start to get a lot of problems with some of the people coming because, of course, people would turn up with schizophrenia and they'd either try and strangle me or which in fact, I had an old lady one day that led on the couch that was hearing voices and things. And I mean, she must have been like 70 if she was a day old, really. So I didn't really see there was a threat at all, particularly. And as soon as I put my hands on her, before I got Chen to come in, she literally grabbed my throat and was effectively wringing my throat again. It's like second time round. And then eventually I'm again screaming. I was looking in the house, I could see Jane making tea and stuff. And I thought, literally, I'm going to be out here totally kind of, out of the game type thing. So I kind of put the thought to Chen and said, can you obviously sort this problem out? And he came in immediately and basically removed what was with her because she was possessed by something very negative and had like unreal strength, like you see in the films, really.
Yeah.
As soon as that entity was disconnected, her arms went limp. Obviously, I could breathe. Chen spoke to this entity and said, I haven't seen you for thousands of years. And they were having this bizarre conversation. And then when she jumped up off the couch, she said, oh, what's happened to your neck? It's all red. That's where you tried to strangle me. She went, oh, did I? I said, yeah, literally, she said, oh, this has happened. This was what was happening. She was having these bouts of losing consciousness because the entity would take over and then, use her for different things. So at that point, we kind of realized that, or I kind of realized at that point that probably working from the garden on my own wasn't the best idea, really.
Yeah. You need a little more protection.
Yeah, and obviously I was talking to Chen to say, this is your job. You're supposed to protect me. So if people are coming in here with these things with them, you need to be sorting it out, really, because obviously physically I'm not in control if you've taken over. So there was a lot of learning and practice from my perspective at that point, really. And then kind of years and years went by of going doing my normal job. And then eventually, 2 years ago, I got made redundant. And of course, it was the exact time that all of the spiritual stuff was becoming quite big and I was struggling to find time. And I said to Chen a few months before, look, if you want me to do this full time, then you need to find the money, basically, because of course, bills to pay and mortgages and things. So of course, we had that conversation and he just said, leave it with me. I wasn't expecting leave it with me to be, we'll make you redundant and remove all of your work, because of course that forced me into the spiritual line, basically. So because I got made redundant, I got, obviously given a couple of months' money, came home and said to Jane, oh, I've been made redundant. And she's like, oh, wow. Because I was working for a small startup company in London, and I was expecting that to be my last job, because I thought if they kind of succeed, which we thought they probably would, and got bought out by a big company, then obviously we'd all get shares and,
Yeah.
financially, that would give me the kind of springboard to do the spiritual stuff. I wasn't expecting to have the money removed completely and be
Jeez.
given this, couple of months of money. And of course, Jane was saying, well, you need to go find another IT job. And I was saying to her, yeah, but Chen's saying this is the starting point. I need to basically do spiritual work full time. So everything was a bit difficult, as you can imagine, for a few months where we're trying to suddenly kickstart courses and be available more time, well, all day and that kind of thing. At the same time as trying to keep the finances working in a positive way, which, I mean, everything worked fine because that was 2 years ago. So here I am doing this full time, which has been good.
Okay. So we have to talk about Terry, and we can't name the other person who is a relative or was a relative because he's still incognito. But so congratulations, by the way, and bravo, Chen. Your methods are sometimes a little harsh, but I'm glad it's gotten you where you are. And I've been fortunate enough to have several sessions with you, with Terry, and we'll talk about him, Terrence Palmer, Dr. Terrence Palmer. We'll talk about him in a minute. But I've been very fortunate to, hear Chen speaking and hear his insights and received healings, not just for me, but for my family members or for friends. So just to let everybody know that we go back a few years, you and I, and that's one reason why I was so excited to read one of your letters and see that it seemed like you were available to do this. And I hadn't thought of it before because I don't know why, but when I saw one of your emails, I was like, yeah, I think the timing's right. So hopefully it is. Let's talk about Terry and how you found him and that whole project. And so why don't we do that? How'd you come
Yeah,
together?
it's a good intro. So obviously I was doing psychic surgery, working with Chen on my own. I had a website by now, effectively. So obviously people were finding me, and so Terry, basically, Dr. Palmer, had just finished his degree in Bangor University. So he'd done like a PhD in psychic studies, that kind of thing. And he had this really burning desire to kind of prove spirit existed. But more than that, he was really interested to see if people that were hearing voices and had intrusive thoughts had spiritual attachment. So he'd had a couple of spiritual experiences himself, and he was basically convinced that spiritual problems were at the heart of a lot of problems that we see in society. So what he did, he basically did what Terry would do. Terry basically if you knew him, was a character. So he basically just sent a mail shot out to hundreds of mediums and psychics all around the world to say, I'm running this project and I don't have any money to pay you, basically, but I'm looking for someone to engage with me on a kind of ad hoc basis to basically work through working with clients to see if we can find what's connected to them, somehow remove what's connected to them, and prove the existence of spirit at the same time. So when I read his email, I laughed to myself and just thought, wow, that's kind of a grandiose concept. But of
Great.
course, from my perspective, we'd already been working with people that were schizophrenic, and I'd seen Chen remove entities and speak to them. So I knew from my perspective, certainly, that negative entities did exist and they were possessing people and they were making those people do negative things and hearing voices, intrusive thoughts. So I replied back with, hi, I'm Andy, here's my website, which I assume you've already found. Interested to have a chat, no guarantees. Let's just have a phone conversation, see if what I'm doing kind of aligns with what you're thinking, really. So of course we had a phone chat for about 3 hours because of course immediately we just hit it off straight away. And obviously I was totally aligned to what he wanted. He wasn't mediumistic or spiritual in that way. He was a scientific type doctor. So there were a few differences in our way of doing things, obviously, but the general concepts were we both were doing the same thing. And I said, I'm happy to work with you, help out, no payment or anything, as and when I can fit it around work and family and stuff. And he was fine with that. So basically we kind of started to work together back in, I think it was like 2011, was it 2011? Somewhere around there. Or maybe before that. Yeah, probably 2011, somewhere in there. So it was like about 13 years ago. So for the first 3 or 4 years, we were basically working. Terry would bring clients to the table. He'd talk to Chen quite a lot. So quite often he'd come and sit with me in my house in Wiltshire. He lived in Kent, so it's a big drive, sort of 3 hours away. So he'd turn up with a suit on, we'd put a camera go in, and then he'd basically interview Chen effectively and talk to him about what Chen's perception of these entities were, how we could remove them and clear them from people's fields, and what other things we'd find. So this is where we kind of built this protocol, basically, whereby we looked for Chen, of course, was learning himself, and he was bringing in other energies to work with him. So he was learning about how to remove entities, discarnate spirits, look for portals in people's fields, interdimensional parasites, then people would have curses and things. So Chen started to realize, again, from his perspective, it wasn't as easy as just removing an entity that's connected, because we did find that quite easy, really. Certainly the low level ones. And then we started to grade entities by their level of difficulty and negativity. So we ended up with like 3 levels of kind of gargoyle, kind of demonic entity, then an ET type variant, really, of some description. So this was kind of a project, really, for Terry and I. So we both didn't really think it would go very far, other than we were both interested, and it was a hobby. And then he started to write some papers and approach the medical and scientific community to talk about people that had, auditory voice hallucination, AVH, as in schizophrenia, hearing voices. And he was presenting to them, and quite quickly, some quite high up people in psychiatry connected to him behind the scenes and said, we hear what you're saying, and we agree that there is a spiritual element to some people's problems. Not everybody, but we know these different organizations are held quite tight in the things that they can and can't do. And obviously talking about entities causing schizophrenia wasn't something that they could do. So Terry was engaging with lots of people behind the scenes and writing papers, and in the end we just decided we just keep working on clients. So I think we worked on about 1,000 clients. And by this time, we started to train people, because I said to Terry, I can't do all of this myself. We need to train other people. And Chen was all for training other people. So we started to run training courses and train other mediums, basically, psychics, and then people that were into hypnosis generally, so facilitators, to kind of do this work. And then they started to work with Terry's clients. And now he had more mediums other than just me to deal with. So for the first probably 600 or 700 cases, we'd done that together over about 6 years. And then he started to kind of be doing 4 or 5 a day with different people and collating the data, that kind of thing. So he extracted this very rich data set over the 1,000 cases that he kind of worked on. And, that data set's kind of on the websites now, which shows the demographics of male to female people that have intrusive problems, and if they feel better afterwards, that kind of thing. So Terry was, he was a bit of a character, really. And then, of course, he went off roaming around the world to go and start teaching, because he wanted to teach. He went off to Buddhist monasteries, and he went to Argentina and quite a few other places. So again, he was very keen to kind of drag me along with him. But of course, I still had my full-time job and family and things, so I didn't really have the timeline to be able to free myself up to do a lot of the things that he wanted to do. Which, when I look back on it now, is quite a shame, because obviously now that he's not here, it would have been the perfect time for us to kind of couple up and continue that work.
Exactly. And I'm just struck by the combination of the 3 of you and him and Chen, and how it refined the work, because his mind was so keen that way. The levels, he would just always find a deeper or different angle or something. He had a wonderful mind, I think, and I enjoyed him very much. I miss him. But I'm so glad to hear that the data sets are available. I didn't know that.
Yes, if you want them, I can send them over. So we've got the data sets. So we've got a lot of obviously by now I was running his website for him, and had like the administrator access to go in and do things and that kind of thing and take backups. So we kind of kept his website still online now with all the data in there. So most of the things that he did, Terry was a maverick, basically, in most ways, kind of thing, to the point that, this will make you laugh, Hope. So he had like an external hard drive connected to his Mac at home, and apparently it used to come out. When I'd be talking to him, he'd say, "Oh, the bloody hard disk disconnected again," and he'd sort of jump up and down and throw his arms in the air and stuff. So after he passed, I think Ben, who was one of our film crew, basically film some of the training sessions that Terry and I had. Excuse me. Ben went to his house to meet his daughter to basically bring this hard disk back that I told Ben we needed, and he'd only super glued it to the back of the cable. Because it kept falling out, he'd actually glued with super glue the thing together. So there was no way to disconnect it from the back of the Mac without breaking it, basically. So it was just like classic Terry, really.
He needed it done quickly and, finally.
Yeah, he wasn't the most patient person in the world, to be fair.
No. But he was so perceptive, and he had such a, keen mind. So anyway, well, I met Terry through my relative, who was also had a very curious mind. And they went on and they had these great long letters that they would write back and forth, and every now and then I'd get CC'd on that or be asked to weigh in on something. What was the color of so-and-so's hair? It's like they were asking me to do my divination to figure these things out. And, it was just fun to be on the periphery of those conversations. But what's interesting is that this relative of mine was fascinated and about the next world, and so he and Terry got their great intelligences, their intellects together, and would feed off each other. And my relative had written several books based on mediumship with the other side, and it's so curious about it, what it was like over there. Anyway, sadly, he also passed over. But I then months later had to contact you because it looked very much, I had a very strong impression that he was hanging around and he was influencing the people who were still alive. And by golly, he was. I called you up and I think I called Terry. Wait, was Terry still alive? I think Terry was still alive. And
Yeah.
we called you up and we said, what? And sure enough, there he was hanging out and still kind of being like the puppeteer of the people left on the ground. And Terry was like, "What are you doing? You should know better than this." And they had an argument. It was like, well, I feel like I still should. And I know you're listening. I know you're listening. So just listen away. But, this was very fascinating to me because, part of what I do on this plane is talk to people and help to prepare people for their ultimate transition. If we can prepare ourselves ahead of time in a way of getting comfortable with it, in a way of living with the end in mind, and being able to have what we would call a good death, even though it may not be totally comfortable, but the idea that you can propel yourself out, that you can cleanly transition so you don't leave behind any of that kind of puppeteering stuff. It benefits those who are left behind, and the more cleanly we can do that, the better, and for our own souls as well. So anyway, this taught me a lot, that interchange, to see that even with the knowledge of another world, of another level of life for the soul after physical death, a person can still come back or not fully leave. And that was really fascinating for me. Anyway, you guys were very helpful with that.
Yeah, thank you, Hope. Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? That again, no one kind of looks for these types of things; they just happen. So, I mean, I remember the conversation. Terry spoke to me and said, could you just check in? And when we checked in, obviously there he was, obviously causing a few problems. And once you're going to have the conversation, say, look, you really can't stay because you're causing problems for the family. All of the people that you love are being affected by you still being here, connected to them. So you do need to move on, which yourself, because this is part of your work effectively. And then, of course, when they do move on, everything changes, isn't it, for the people that are still alive? And
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of the instrumental thing I see so often now from my perspective is that, when people kind of don't move on, they die, and that spirit hangs about and connects to other people, or quite a lot of these spirits seem to get entangled in our field that they can't get out. So it's not the fact that they've connected to us and they want to stay with us. Quite often, they seem to get entangled in our etheric field and then they can't leave. And of course, then they become these kind of backpack hitchhikers that we drag around with us, but we're not having our own thoughts anymore.
Let's talk about that, because if there was something, okay, so there are two levels going on here as I see it. One is the entanglement of the soul who is departing, who is still very much entangled with their physical reality and not willing to let go. But then there are those who are still alive, who are so emotionally entangled with that being that it's in a way holding them back. Would you say those two things go
Yeah,
on, or?
exactly that way around. It's either one way or the other. It's either the living person is in such a state of trauma, and the departing spirit is held back by them, or the other way around, generally.
And sometimes both, I would think.
Well, and both, yeah, of course, yes. I mean, quite often we would talk to like a daughter that had passed. The mother would be traumatized, so she'd be trying to hold on to the energy or the memory of the daughter's spirit. The daughter would be traumatized that she's left before her mum, effectively, and sees the state her mum's in. So they kind of end up connected together, which isn't then good for either, because then you've got mum that's upset, crying all the time, and is very emotional because she's got a daughter that's still connected to her having those sort of thoughts, and the daughter's feeling mum's pain and can't leave. So until there's
Just
some
keep
sort of
going around
intervention,
and around, right? Just around and around.
yeah, and that can go on for the rest of their lives, obviously, until you get some sort of spiritual intervention to disconnect the two and obviously move on the daughter back to spirit and then release, the mother so she can finish her grieving and then move back into some level of resemblance of normality, I guess.
This is, yeah, I work with somebody named Gary Malkin. He's a composer, very wonderful composer. And he created something called Graceful Passages 20 years ago or so. And it's music and spoken word to help people with what he calls grief literacy. So being able to emotionally move through the release, the grief and all of that, so that we get to gratitude on the other side. And so we 2 years ago, we started running these workshops, and to let people have experiences that usually come through me, a transmission that comes through that is set up in a 4-step process to help people move through their grief so that they're not entangled like that anymore. But I'm curious, on your end, is it possible to do this on one's own, like in a workshop such as that, or with a meditation, or even just an intention? Could a person basically get disentangled all by themselves, or do you think it's essential to have a medium intervention?
I think probably some people probably can do it themselves. Again, with the right intention. Again, it depends how strong those bonds are and what type of trauma there is, between the two people, or the one that's alive and dead. So I think for probably for the majority, you probably can disentangle themselves on their own if they want to. Certainly, the living person's got a lot of energy, and if they're thinking about sending love and gratitude to the person that's died and helping them to kind of move out of their field, I think it would, definitely is more than likely that would happen. I think it's the massive traumas that are a bigger problem, whereby a medium is able to talk to the actual spirit and then have, because when you talk to them, you actually explain, look, what's happening is you're causing a really big problem for the person living and yourself. So you're not free yourself. You should be in spirit and you should be moving on. And the person can't continue to live their normal life because you're entangled in their field. All of your emotions and thoughts are being picked up by them, and your addictions and your habits and all those things get overlaid onto the person that's alive. So the person that's alive has now got a kind of completely different life, really, to the one that they had before. And quite often, this is what, families would sort of say to us, is that, someone that didn't smoke suddenly starts smoking sort of 60 cigarettes a day, or someone that didn't drink suddenly becomes an alcoholic because the other person was an alcoholic, or the other person was a smoker. So it became obvious to me and Terry, you could see exactly what was happening and think, okay, in some cases, this is what seems to happen.
Mhm.
And that's
Mhm.
where, obviously, from a mediumistic perspective, I was just having a conversation with those spirits and just explaining, look, you do need to move on. And then, of course, that's where I would call in Chen and say, we're going to help you to do this. So I'm going to bring my guide in, who they then see, and they say, oh, I see a Chinese man. I say, yeah, short Chinese man with a beard turns up and says, come with us, we're going to open the door, take you to the light, and move them on. And then Chen would say to me, yep, they've gone. And then we'd obviously relay that back to the person that's still alive and say, okay, your loved one's been moved on now, they're safe where they should be. And then Terry would check in 2 or 3 weeks later and just check that person was feeling okay. And normally this would be I've stopped smoking, I've stopped drinking, all the things that they did, they immediately stop again. So that's where Terry was fascinated with all of these types of addictions and compulsions that are coming from the spiritual base, not the physical one.
Mhm. Mhm. Couple of things. I've often said, because I've seen it and I've experienced it myself, that in the field of hospice and grief recovery and all that, I think it's essential to have at least one session with a medium. It's like a way to finish it, a way to just let the person know they're safe, they're secure, everything's fine. They don't hold any grudges. You don't have to carry the guilt. I mean, it puts such a gentle thingy on it. And I have seen people who have just been caught in this grief cycle for so long, and then just one session um just lets the air out of the bag, and they can just rest. They can just recover. So I'm underscoring what you're saying, because I wish that that it was written into the script in a way. Okay, somebody's died. Okay, I've cried for X number of months. Okay, now I go to the medium,
Because I
or
think
whatever.
because it kind of should be, shouldn't it? If you think about it, we're spiritual beings. So when someone dies, the spiritual part needs to be moved across and needs to be checked that it's gone and detached. So it kind of, in the same way that you kind of, when someone dies, you obviously pack up all their belongings and you move them on to someone else, or give them to a thrift shop or charity shop or something. The same thing should be happening with the spirit. I mean, I was working on a young girl that came to see me that was dying of brain cancer. And we probably only saw her for about 2 months, I guess. It's right at the end of her life. And she, first of all, she stumbled in, she could hardly walk, and put on the couch. Chen would talk to her and try and do some work. And then the next week she came in a wheelchair, and obviously she was terminally ill, ended up in a hospice. And then, her mum was obviously grasping at any straw, really, but clearly there was only going to be one end, effectively. And, she said, oh, can you come in? Because Chen was proving basically sort of validity of life from a spiritual perspective with this girl. So when he was talking to her, he was talking about what it's like to be in spirit. And he said to her, look, when you take your last breath, I'll come and get you, because they built up quite a relationship by then. And so we did a CD. I actually basically got Chen to, I pressed record on the CD, let Chen in, and he basically told her how to pass, basically. When it comes
Really?
to the last breath, this is what you need to do. And he said, I'll be there on the other side. So we gave the mother this CD and said, look, at some point she's going to probably ask to play this stuff, which she did in the hospice. And then we had a phone call from my mum about an hour later saying, literally played the CD, and within 5 minutes she basically passed, but really peacefully, totally quietly, and there was no problem at all. And then, of course, we got invited to the funeral, which was quite emotional for me, really, because obviously we kind of connected and helped her mum through this whole thing. So we kind of become the sort of the connection to the daughter, really, from a mediumistic perspective. So I stood up and gave a talk about the last few weeks we've met her at the funeral. And then I went and sat down, and then they played a song. And as soon as they played this song, I saw her walk in, and she started to dance and throw her arms about. And I had tears sort of, sort of pouring out really, because it was quite emotional. And then I said to her mum, "This is what I saw," and she went, "Oh, that's exactly how she danced. The way that I described it was the exact way she danced to this particular song," and that provided, from that day on, that provided the sort of, the okay that she was happy, and she'd obviously gone to the right side, and everything was okay. And you think, as you said, everyone that passes, in theory, there should be a spiritual person to help that whole, they're okay, they got there, they're fine, it would make things so much easier for those that are living and for those that have passed, of course.
Yeah, yeah, it would just cut short that circuit, that
Yeah,
kind of descending spiral, and that robs people of their vitality. And I hope that someday it becomes the norm, you know.
yeah, I think it will. I mean, my mum and dad have passed, both passed within the last 2 years. And, my dad was sort of semi on the spiritual thing, but not really, but he didn't really get exactly what I did. And I said, "Well, one day I'll talk to you, Dad, when you pass." So he had like cancer, was riddled. He passed over within a week, basically. He came back and said, "God, you're right. You're totally right." And of course, I'm laughing. I know, you didn't read my book, did you? And he said, "Well, no, we didn't really believe it, to be honest." So he was really shocked. And then when my mum passed, it was the same conversation, because she was really ill, and it was clearly coming to the end. And I said, "Do you want to read my book, Mum? This is the spiritual stuff about Chen and passing and life and death and all that kind of stuff's in there." And she said, "No, I don't believe it. I'm not going anywhere. That's just me ended." I said, "Well, not really, because obviously I've been doing this for 20 years. So, so anyway, I said to her, 'Well, you just assume what you assume, and then when you pass, I'll dial you up and we'll have a chat.'" So of course, again, it was the same thing. After a few weeks, Jane and I were sat downstairs watching telly in the evening. I could feel this draft coming in, where the room starting to get cold. And I turned around, and like Mum stood there presenting when she was like 30 or 40, sort of thing. And I said, "Oh, so we had a chat." And she said, "I can't believe it." She said, "The whole family's here, and you were totally right. Why didn't we get it?"
Oh my goodness. Oh, I love it so much.
But like she said, "Isn't it a shame that people don't believe until until they're not able to connect again?" Because for most people, when you've died, you don't have the option to come back and say to your family members, "Do you know what? I'm okay. I'm on the other side. I'm here with my nan and gran and uncle and granddad and all the rest of it." Because most people don't get that confirmation. But obviously, because this is what we do, and like yourself, that's the case. So you just wait for the call, effectively.
Mhm, mhm, exactly. So, geez, I have so many things I could ask. Well, first of all, would it be appropriate to ask what Chen suggested that we do when we're transitioning?
Yeah. Well, do you want me to get Chen in to have a chat with him?
Oh gosh, I would love it.
Yeah.
Oh, I would love to
That's
chat with him.
that's the easiest way, really, is to take me out of the loop and just go straight to the boss, sort of thing.
Okay, okay.
Cool. Okay, just give me a second. So yeah, so basically just talk to him like we're talking to me, basically.
Yeah,
And then you can ask him the questions, and we'll get the kind of the right info from his perspective. Which is
fantastic.
okay, I'll see you in a while.
Okay.
Good day, my dear.
Oh, Chen, it is such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes, I've been exhilarated, my dear, waiting to meet you for quite a long, long time.
Yes, we've only met through others, so now we get to talk face to face.
Yes, this is a much better medium to be able to converse and speak about things in the first person.
I love that. I love that. Well, I first of all, I want to thank you for all the help that you've given me and my family members and friends over the years. I really appreciate it.
Of course, my dear, we're more than happy to help. And of course, we do work together in different lives, doing different things. So it certainly isn't the first time or the last time that we connect, just in different ways.
I accept that and I agree, and I look forward to whatever's next. Let me ask you, because Andy was sharing this story of this young girl who passed because of cancer, brain cancer, and the what you suggested that she do at the moment of transition. this is so important to me and to the work that I'm doing, part of the work that I'm doing, to help people prepare for their ultimate transition.
Yes, well,
Which,
it's an elemental question, my dear, really, because of course all of you that are in a physical body have to have an ending. You have to have a life termination at some point. So your life will be terminated. And then when the physicality obviously is terminated, the spiritual intelligence that's inside that we term as the spirit or the soul obviously has to disconnect from the physical body. And then, of course, it transitions back to a different frequency of vibration that we know as a spirit or home, or obviously other names depending upon your particular cultural or religious context. So the way that we see things, or certainly the way that I explained things to this young girl, she was very fearful, of course, of passing, because she was quite young and she'd been in a lot of pain. And I'd been working with young Andrew at the time to provide pain relief primarily, because at the time that we were engaged with her, it was clearly at the very latter stages of her life, and there wasn't going to be any magic or miraculous recovery. So what we could do, or what we could offer at the time, was pain relief on a weekly basis. But more importantly, I wanted to take her through the process of her passing, because she was clearly going to pass. And I decided that if we could work with her over a number of weeks to talk about the way that you die and the way that you pass, it would take away the fear. And if she wasn't in fear, that would stop her becoming earthbound. Because as I'm sure you realize, my dear, people that pass in a lot of fear, that have been in a lot of traumatic pain at the end of their life, they tend to become earthbound and hang around. And they either stay connected to the space that they last left, or when they leave their physical body, they immediately connect to somebody else. So with this young girl, I wanted to basically explain to her that when the time was right, she would know, because of course she'd start to feel when you die. Basically, the process is, from my perspective, the physical person starts to detach from the spiritual part of you, starts to detach from the physical. So a bit like when you've been drinking lots of alcohol and you start to have that floaty feeling, and you know that the spiritual part of you is intoxicated, basically, and you start to lose control and not worry too much about what you say or how you feel. That's the same type of feeling that you would feel upon death. So you start to lose this concept of the physical, because what's happening, of course, is the spiritual vibration is leaving, excuse me, my dear, is leaving the physical body. So as that spiritual intelligence starts to leave, almost like a balloon that you let go, it starts to rise upwards because the vibration starts to increase. Because, of course, the spiritual intelligence vibrates at a much higher frequency than a person's physical body. So the two things start to separate. And as you separate, you lose the feelings that the body has. So if you're in immense pain, you immediately stop feeling the pain as the spirit starts to leave. And then, of course, because there's no pain, there's no traumatic feeling. So the spirit generally starts to calm itself down from a mental perspective. And of course, there are no emotions anymore, because the emotions are connected to the physical body. So the emotional feelings start to stop as well. So it's almost like when you're in a dream and you start to drift off, almost without a care in the world, particularly. So if you're in a very calm state before that happens, the physical body disconnects from the spiritual body. And this is where people talk about seeing the light. But of course, the concept is it's the physical eyes as they close down. This is where people talk about the light and the tunnel. But of course, it's just the physical body closing down that you see the light, because as a spiritual entity, you are effectively the light or the vibration. So you don't see it because you don't have eyes to see. So the spiritual part just starts to leave and transcend. And if there's no huge emotional trauma and pain, then of course that physical aspect stops, the heart stops beating, the spiritual part leaves and obviously moves into a different frequency of vibration. And that's generally when you see your guide. So in this case, this is when I presented myself to this young girl and said, here I am. It's Chen, we've been speaking, you know who I am. I told you this would happen. Now effectively take my hand and I will take you through to the vibrational spirit. So basically, obviously I don't take her hand, she doesn't have a physical hand, but the concept being that she follows me and she knows who I am. She felt at ease with me and she was suddenly happy, because all of the traumatic pain and the emotional feelings she had have been transcended completely and gone. So she's now just an energy, effectively, and we move back to spirit. So that's the dying process from our perspective. And this, of course, is why, as you just said, my dear, when people actually have their last breath, if that last breath is taken in harmony with a consciously level vibration with no particular strong negative emotion, then the spirit leaves the body very easily. But if that person's in a lot of trauma, or they're not wanting to leave their family members, or they're in pain, or primarily fear-based, really, then of course they either are kicked out of their physical body and then they become an energy, and that energy can then basically launch itself into someone in the room, generally a parent or someone that's very close to them, or of course it becomes earthbound to the spot completely. So if we take the battlefield would be a good example. So if you imagine a troop of soldiers walking down the road and a huge big bomb lands next to them, they don't know it's coming from a conscious perspective. They suddenly are blasted and have no physical body. All of the physical body completely disappears. So all that's left there now is a troop of spiritual soldiers that are stood in the spot, that have no physicality. They weren't expecting to die that moment and leave their body, and they stay rooted to the spot. So they literally can't move because they're all in complete shock. The spirit's in shock. They're all there together. So basically, energetically, they're effectively rooted there. And this is where, of course, we see on battlefields, we have these groups of soldiers that are just left and they can't move. They're basically waiting for, again, a spiritual medium or someone to come along to notice that they're there, to connect to them, and then effectively open a doorway and allow them to move into their home or their spiritual vibration. Does that make sense to you, my dear?
Absolutely, 100%. And actually, in your last example, I've had a couple of experiences. One or twice out in the Southwest in the canyons, where it seemed that there were Native Americans rooted in there. And another one was in Scotland last fall in the battlefield of Culloden. And both places we did practices, crossover practices, or something to hopefully help those spirits to become unrooted from their traumatic ends. I don't know if we were successful, but that was the thought.
Yes, I'm sure you were, my dear, because of course you don't have to be particularly fantastic at this work to do what you do as a medium. When you see a group, or you can connect to or speak to a group of spiritual energies, it's just the case, once you speak to them, effectively you do release them already because you're talking to them through the veil effectively. And then of course you call in your own guides with your intention to basically help that transition. So you as a physical person don't really need to do anything. All you need to be able to do is to notice or see or have the intention to ask your spiritual guides to do that work. And that's, of course, from our perspective, the easiest thing for us to do, because it's just taking someone home. In the same way that if you saw a child in the street that had no parent, you would take their hand and you'd take them into your house. And you'd say, oh, we will speak to your parent, we'll phone them or connect to them and get them to come and collect you. It's the same concept from our perspective. It's just taking the hand of that spiritual energy that's deceased and just helping them into the new vibration.
Yes, based on this conversation, I'm going to encourage everybody who listens to this to do that simple act. Just to, when you go past a famous battlefield, or even not a famous one, or if you have a sensation that there may be some people stuck or a person stuck, just to call in your guides. Exactly as Chen said, I won't repeat it. Thank you. That was really, really helpful. I think it will be very helpful for a lot of people. Now, I just want to ask you a question about reincarnation. So once we've left, and the reason I'm asking this question is there's some thinking that there's kind of a big cycle that we're stuck in, a cycle of reincarnating, and that if the Buddhists say, if you look for the blue light and not the white light, go past the white light, go to the blue light, you'll somehow break free of that cycle of reincarnation. I love your thoughts on this.
Yes, it's a very interesting topic of conversation. So certainly from our perspective, the only light that you really see, again, is as the eyes close down, then you see this tunnel that gets smaller and smaller. And of course, effectively, it's the retina closing down. So when people that have had near-death experiences, so they've effectively died or been involved in a car accident or some trauma, and they've effectively died, then effectively the eye closes down, so they see this tunnel of light that people talk about. And then, of course, they may be given some type of shock by the medical profession to bring their heart back into rhythm. And obviously, next thing you know, they're back alive again. And then, of course, they open their eyes. So, this concept of seeing a light, I think, from our perspective, is just the concept of the actual physical eye and retina closing down before the spirit passes. But we don't really agree with that Buddhist example from that perspective. So certainly from our perspective, reincarnation is obviously a thing. So there are lots of you have been here lots of times. You've also lived on lots of other planets lots of times as well. So most people that are living in the Western world, like yourself, my dear, and obviously young Andrew, have had many, many lives. And obviously this part of the soul's progression. And when you have a life, from our perspective, two things happen really. You're progressing your own soul, so you're learning and you're making choices and having tests, etc., to basically progress yourself spiritually. But you're also progressing the species, so that the humanoid species, everything you do, everything you think, everything you learn, that information gets connected effectively to this kind of neural grid almost that humans that come in have access to. And this is where we get this concept that mediums and psychics are able to connect to this almost like this neural grid of all of these experiences and connect to people and other spirits and such like. So the reincarnation concept, from my perspective, is certainly real, but it's not just limited to this planet. And it's also one of the reasons that lots of people have problems with spiders. I've talked about this before. I'm sure you know people that are scared of spiders. But of course, if you look at the spiders, they're tiny things compared to you. So you would think logically, why would so many people have this huge, big fear of something so small that if it bites you, you probably wouldn't even notice, and it certainly wouldn't be able to kill you? And this, of course, comes from other planets whereby insectoids are much bigger than other species like humans. And there have been insectoid wars and such like, where people have been in those environments on those other planets. And people that have this huge fear of spiders for no reason have probably come from those sorts of places and been reincarnated back here at some point in their evolution.
Very interesting. That makes a lot of sense. I have a daughter who's terrified of spiders, so that explains it. So will this process of reincarnation, do you ever reach a point where you're done?
Yes. Yeah. So again, I mean, from my perspective, if you could see there's a huge queue of spiritual energies like yourselves waiting to incarnate into planet Earth, because planet Earth is this amazing place that you can do so much because you get the physical body, you have the spiritual essence and intelligence that articulates it and moves it. You can connect to other entities and species. And of course, as a species, a human species, you have emotion. Now, if we look at lots of other extraterrestrial species, they're devoid of emotion because it's either been grown out of their evolution or they never had it in the first place. But the human is almost like this animal that's basically been evolved through genetic manipulation to have this level of intelligence and go through all of these emotions. So this is why there are so many people and so many entities that are so interested in the human species, really.
Yes, and I've read and heard all about a lot of multiple experiments of extraterrestrial combining with our DNA, and as you say, to make us more and more intelligent. And now we're really facing as a species the introduction, even though I know it's been here a long time, but the conscious introduction of AI, which is another level again. And that's going to be very interesting. I wonder if you have a perspective on that.
Yes, I think from that perspective, as you say, from an evolvement perspective, obviously the human being won't continue evolving. Eventually, you evolve to the point that you don't need a body. And then, of course, from a spiritual perspective, it's about vibration primarily. So if you're vibrating at a low frequency in the third dimension, you need a physical body. But as you start to transcend the third dimension and move upwards, you don't need the physicality anymore, particularly. And this, of course, is some people call this the astral plane, where obviously other entities all exist without physical bodies, but you have all of the spiritual intelligence there. And of course, this is where the AI concept comes in now, that we have this artificial intelligence that effectively is almost like a software overlay that's being connected to the planet. And the way we see this, certainly from a spiritual perspective, is twofold, really. You have the human version of AI, so you have the computer code, so you can talk to a computer program effectively. But like all programs, they only give you the possibilities that have been programmed in. So effectively, if you're talking to an AI software bot, basically, it can only answer with the information it has to give you. And of course, that means that there's a huge level of control that can be baked in to the conversation. And of course, I think I talked about this some time ago with dear Jane, and said that the big problem really for humanity is that AI will dumb down the species, because everyone will start to integrate with AI and ask it questions, and then you start writing your emails and letters to each other using AI, so everyone has correct grammar, etc. So you can imagine as you move forward, you get to a point whereby a whole demographic of population can no longer speak properly, they can no longer spell, they use AI for everything. And of course, AI then can basically be used as a control system to control the narrative of the conversation, which obviously is a big problem for the human species, really.
Yes,
And then,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
sorry. So that was one facet, my dear. Then secondly, of course, you've got biological AI as well. So we see there are entities that are manifesting inside this planet now that are coming in, so with effectively a biological AI overlay. So this is where you're starting to see effectively entities that are artificial intelligence that have biology. So effectively, these would look to you like almost like a human clone, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I think they're already here.
Yes, they are here. Yes.
Mhm.
And of course, the problem is, if you can imagine, if some of these biological AI constructs start to take positions of power, then you no longer have humans and humanity making decisions for itself. From an emotional perspective, you have some sort of other energy making big decisions that don't really nurture and are not really positive to the actual human species.
We're really at a crucible now, I think, in terms of how we go forward and with our humanity intact. And for the average person, you know, what kinds of things can we do to further that cause so that we don't become overrun, we don't have our sovereignty taken away? Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, it's an interesting dilemma, I guess, to a certain degree. So I agree with you, my dear, that this is now a very interesting time. You've got, if you notice, no one probably heard of AI bots or programs 2 or 3 years ago, and now everyone's using AI chatbots to do everything for them. So you ask it questions about anything, it can give you the answers, it can produce blogs for you and write articles and all those sorts of things. So suddenly these AI programs appear to have come out of nowhere, and everyone's using them. And of course, that will dumb down the populace very quickly. So the first thing is obviously, but of course, AI can be used in a positive way. So because an AI software program is able to access, or certainly currently is able to access the majority of the information, then of course, humanity can start to build devices with advanced technology and understanding that an individual personal human wouldn't have. So if we took an engineer only has his understanding of his selective training to be able to build something. But if you can imagine a collective, if every engineer put all of their information into one program and then asked that program to build a new vehicle that runs on some type of new fuel that is renewable, that doesn't require anything else, etc., etc., that AI program can probably use all of the information from all of those people to actually come up with something that humans would never do for the next 100 years.
Yeah.
So there is this concept that you can start to tap into this extraordinary amount of information and use it in a positive way. But of course, it could be used in a negative way. And then the other problem, of course, is, again, the corporations are taking control and have a stranglehold on the resources of the planet. And this, of course, is going to be the bigger problem for most people that are alive today, is as these huge corporations control all of the resources, it won't be long before they control the air and the water. And of course, when they control the air and the water, and suddenly you have to pay to breathe and you have to pay to drink, then the human species is in a very difficult place. And of course, this is what corporations do. They just get bigger and bigger, and they control more and more things with their tentacles. And of course, the finance system is part of that too. So it's for normal people to start to look at the picture and start to walk away from some of these levels of control and get back to the concepts of people talking to real people rather than talking to AI bots and programs, people sitting down, having a coffee, discussing things. All of the things that make a human human are the things that will continue to move the species forward. But integrating with technology and AI is potentially going to be quite a big downfall from our perspective.
Oh boy, I'm so in sync with what you're saying. And my last question is has to do with, it's kind of on a personal level, but not just personal. I've been called to do a retreat in Mount Shasta in a few weeks on what we call the Lion's Gate 888. And specifically on Mount Shasta, specifically at noon Pacific. And the theme of this has been freedom. And it's freedom for humanity, but it's also the planet, the animal, the whole natural world. And when I'm leaning into this idea, which I've heard before, but how you expressed it as the neural grid. I'm leaning into the idea that whatever the transmission that comes through at that time is meant to broadcast into that neural grid and hopefully give some energy to this, what you're talking about, this ability for we humans to retain our humanity, to reclaim it and not go down, be balanced in the way we use AI and all of these new things coming in. Anyway, it's not really a question, but I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
Yes, I mean, what you're talking about, my dear, is instrumental. From our perspective, what you're saying is that you're going to open a portal, basically, and through that portal, when you actually tune that at that particular time, you're going to bring in new energy, new vibration that cascades around the planet. Because, of course, Mount Shasta is an acupuncture point, a huge, big acupuncture point for planet Earth. And energetically, it moves energy around the whole lay structure of the planet. So this is why there are these places on planet Earth that are huge, energetic, effectively portals. And of course, most of those portals have either been corrupted or they've been closed by the negative agenda so that they stay as a low vibration. But the things that you're talking about doing will be opening a portal to bring in higher light-based frequencies that effectively then everyone on the planet can connect into. And these types of things are instrumental in moving humanity forward, because what we have really is we have the human species either becoming more spiritual and effectively ascending into a more spiritual space, like we did in Atlantis and Lemuria, those sorts of things, or we have the human species being controlled by the dark agenda, which effectively is a type of software AI type control. So if you think of the Matrix film idea, the Matrix was perfect really, because obviously it basically depicts in video format exactly what's happening in terms of a spiritual battle, a spiritual war that's been going on for eons between the dark and the light. So those people that are effectively in their cocoons with their headsets on, connecting to the neural AI network, lose the ability to think for themselves. And those people that are connected to the planet, people like shamans and native species, are connected to the nature grid. So effectively, there's two different grids being constructed. There's the big city AI type neural network, and then you have the sort of naturistic aspect connecting to guides like myself and other spiritual energies. So this is the precipice that humanity finds itself on, really.
So we want to connect into that nature grid for when we do this at Mount Shasta, would you suggest? Or is
Yes,
the portal going to do the job for us?
the port when you actually do your work, the portal will open by default. But of course, there are lots of elementals that live in that vibration space that will come forward and work with you when you actually open that grid, because their job is to control the naturistic aspect of the planet.
Okay, wow. Oh, Chen, I could talk to you for hours, my friend. And hopefully we'll do this again.
Yes, I would.
And
I did.
that would be wonderful. I have to thank you so, so much. And I'll report back on our Shasta event, and maybe you can report back too and tell me how we did.
Yes, we will be watching with much interest, I can assure you, my dear.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll bring back young Andrew, and we will obviously connect again at some point in the future.
Lovely. Much love to you. Oh, wow. That was just fantastic. Thank you
You're
so
smiling,
much.
eh? Which is good.
So good. So, so good. Very, oh, just so useful too, information that will really benefit a lot of people.
Yeah, he seems to have a lot of knowledge about lots of different things. Because when I first used to talk to him, obviously we were only dealing with entities really, and he didn't really know much about entities other than how to remove them at the time. So kind of 15 years on now, obviously he seems to be quite well. He seems to do and understand a lot more things, and obviously they're part of their own big network as well. So rather than just Chen now behind the scenes, there is obviously a whole lot of other entities that are kind of working with him in that way. So I think it's made things a lot more interesting, really.
Yeah, yeah. And I noticed that too, when I first started doing this, it wasn't too long before it became a revolving door. Well, who's coming to visit today? That kind of thing. And it's really kind of fun. I never in a million years thought I would be doing this either. Um, but
Uh,
Andy, I'm gonna wrap it up just because of time, but I would really love to do this again in a few months
yeah,
and
that'd be
just
fantastic.
kind
Yeah,
of have a regular discourse because there's so much territory to cover.
yeah, that's the
And
thing. Actually.
right,
As we start speaking, you start to realise the breadth of the conversation, really.
exactly. So if you're
Yeah,
game to
that'd be
do,
great. Definitely.
all right. Well, listen, let me get the information about your book. Um, so that I have it in your emails, but I want to make sure we state it here and also your website.
Yeah, so the website is andy-porter.co.uk, or you can just type Andy Porter Psychic Surgeon, and that should pop up in Google. And then the book basically is a free download on the website. So you can go to the website and the book that I wrote along with Chen. So it's one of these, I wrote it probably 15 years ago because I had such a kind of difficult way to understand spirituality. And then there wasn't, I wanted one book that just told me everything, basically, and there wasn't one. And you have to read all these books, and they're all different, and they all kind of don't really complement each other. So I wanted to write a very simple book for simple people like me that just explained everything in kind of a page, really. So let's talk about aliens in a page. Let's talk about, chakras in a page. So basically, I would write my understanding, and then Chen would channel through me and write his. So this book became like this kind of like I've got my opinion, this is it, and this is what Chen's channeled through. So we kind of covered everything like aliens, animals, the planet, all sorts of stuff. And it became hopefully like an easy place for people to start to get just an idea, or certainly my version of an idea of what spirituality is all about. If you're being turned on, then this book is a starting point. And hopefully, and it
Fantastic.
was supposed to be a quick read, because I don't know if you read Terry's book. Terry wrote The Spirit of Science Possession.
I just read some of his papers and that was enough to knock the stuffing out of me.
And they wrote this huge big book basically, and it was designed for psychiatry and people, but I mean, I never finished it. I sat for hours and hours trying to understand it, and everything's being referenced all over the place. It was like a scientific book for scientists. And in the end, I just put it down and thought, I just can't get through it really. And I said to Terry, can't you just write an easy version for normal people?
I think Terry was from another planet. I swear. Yeah,
Yeah,
she's mine,
he
right?
definitely, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would say that. I mean, obviously still talk to him now. So with the whole SRA thing, we're obviously still running that together, and Terry's putting things together behind the scenes. So he's still instrumental in the work, which is, I mean, and the funny thing was actually, he said to me a little while back, if he was still alive, we'd never have got to where we've got to now with SRA, because he was quite controlling about everything, and he'd never have let us take it in the direction that we have if he was at the helm, basically.
Wow. Wow. Well, good on you, Terry. Good
So
on you. Well, I love you. I miss you, and I'm so glad to have at least some connection with you through Andy.
yeah, perfect.
All right. Well, thank you ever so much, and we'll dial this in again and see what's up the next time.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, Hope, it's great to talk to you. I've enjoyed it, and we'll definitely catch you again.
All right. Take care.
Okay, cheers. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.